Welcome back to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. The cold that night was not just weather. It was alive. It pressed against every living thing in that Alaskan forest like a slow, patient hand, squeezing the sap from the pine trees until their bark cracked like rifle shots in the dark, turning the narrow forest road into a ribbon of black glass buried beneath a foot of shifting snow. The wind did not howl the way people describe it in stories. It screamed, low and long and without mercy, the way something screams when it has already decided the outcome. 27-year-old forest ranger Daniel Brooks was driving straight into the heart of it, both hands tight on the wheel, body leaning forward, eyes burning from the effort of trying to see through a windshield that the wipers could no longer keep clear. His headlights caught nothing useful, only the endless curtain of white that the storm kept throwing at him, wave after wave, as if the wilderness itself was trying to push him back. He reached for his radio. Static. Nothing but static and the sound of his own breathing. 4 more miles, he told himself. 4 more miles and you're home. He had said that 3 miles ago. He never saw the ice. One moment the SUV was moving forward, slow and deliberate. The next, silence replaced by chaos. The tires broke loose without warning, and the world tilted sideways in a single violent second. Daniel felt the steering wheel ripped from his hands. He heard himself shout, one short, sharp sound, and then the vehicle left the road, dropped hard into the ditch, and rolled. The sound of the crash died almost immediately, swallowed by the storm. Steam rose from the crumpled hood in thin white threads. Daniel lay in the snow 15 feet from the wreck. He had been thrown clear on impact. He lay face up, one arm stretched wide, his orange ranger jacket already dusting white at the collar. His eyes were closed. His breath came in slow, shallow clouds that rose and vanished into the dark above him. The temperature was 45 degrees below zero.
The storm did not pause. It did not acknowledge what had just happened. It simply continued, covering the tire tracks, softening the edges of the wreck, beginning its patient, indifferent work of erasing the evidence that any of this had occurred. In 20 minutes, a man lying still in that snow would be nearly invisible. In 40, the cold would finish what the crash had started. He came from between the trees without a sound. One moment the tree line was empty, dark shapes of frozen pine against a darker sky. The next, a figure moved through the gap in the forest, large and deliberate, stepping through the deep snow with a careful, almost reverent kind of grace. The wild horse was dark, nearly black in that light, with a mane heavy with ice crystals that caught the faint glow of the smoldering SUV. He was not small. He was the kind of animal that made you understand instinctively that the wilderness had built him for exactly this, for cold this deep, for snow this heavy, for nights this long. He stopped at the edge of the ditch and looked down at the man in the snow. His nostrils flared. His ears moved forward. He stood absolutely still for a long moment, reading something in the air that no human instrument could have measured. Then he stepped down carefully into the ditch and lowered his great head. He pressed his nose gently against Daniel's shoulder. Nothing. He nudged again, firmer, insistent, and Daniel's arm shifted slightly in the snow, but his eyes did not open, and his breathing did not change. The horse lifted his head and stood over the ranger for a long, quiet moment. His breath came in great rolling clouds in the frozen air. His dark eyes moved once across the wrecked vehicle, once across the empty road, once across the unbroken wilderness in every direction. Then he turned and ran north through the storm. Samuel Grant was 70 years old and had not been surprised by much in the last 30 of them.
He was sitting in the wooden chair closest to the fireplace, the one whose right armrest was worn smooth from decades of the same elbow resting in the same spot, with a cup of black
coffee going cold in his hands, and his old gray-muzzled shepherd, Huck, asleep across his boots. Outside, the storm worked furiously at the walls of his cabin. Samuel listened to it the way a sailor listens to the sea, not with fear, but with the attentive respect of a man who knows exactly what the thing he is listening to is capable of. He was nearly asleep himself when Huck lifted his head. The old dog did not bark. He simply raised his muzzle from the floor and turned slowly toward the cabin door, ears high, body rigid with attention. Samuel opened his eyes. "What is it, boy?" Huck didn't answer, of course, but his ears stayed up. And then Samuel heard it. Hoofbeats, hard and rhythmic against the frozen ground just outside the door, and something else beneath them, a frantic, stomping energy that did not belong to any animal simply passing through. Samuel set down his coffee and stood. He pulled on his coat in one practiced motion, lifted his lantern from the hook beside the door, and opened it. The horse was standing 6 feet away, snow-plastered and heaving, its breath exploding from its nostrils in thick white bursts. Its eyes caught the lantern light and held them, dark and urgent and absolutely focused on the old man in the doorway. Samuel had lived long enough in the Alaskan wilderness to stop dismissing things he could not immediately explain. He had seen ravens circle above injured animals for hours. He had watched a moose lead her injured calf to shallow water where it could rest. He did not need a scientific explanation for what he was looking at. He understood it the way old men understand things that younger men have not yet learned to see. "All right," he said quietly. "Show me." The horse turned immediately, took 4 steps into the storm, stopped, looked back over its shoulder. Samuel pulled his coat tight, called back to Huck to stay, and walked into the blizzard. The horse moved steadily through the dark, and Samuel followed. The lantern threw a small, trembling circle of orange light around the old man's feet. Beyond that, nothing but white and wind and the dark shapes of pine trees passing on either side. Every 30 or 40 steps, the horse would slow and glance back to make sure he was still there. And every time Samuel felt his aging legs begin to protest, he would see those dark eyes looking back at him through the storm, and he would keep walking. It took 20 minutes to reach the crash site. When Samuel's lantern finally swept across the shape of a man lying motionless in the snow, the old trapper stopped breathing for a full second. Then he moved faster than he had moved in years. He dropped to one knee beside Daniel and pressed 2 fingers hard against the young man's neck. A pulse, faint and slow, but there. "Son," his voice came out sharp, urgent. "Son, open your eyes." Nothing. "Son!" Daniel's eyelids twitched, the faintest motion, but nothing more. Samuel did not waste another second on words. He got his arms beneath the young ranger's shoulders, planted his boots in the snow, and lifted. His back screamed at him. His knees trembled with the weight and the cold. He was 70 years old, and this man was not small. He lifted him anyway. He walked back through the storm the same way he had come. One step, then the next, then the one after that, with the horse moving quietly alongside him the entire way, close enough that Samuel could feel the animal's warmth against his left arm like a furnace walking beside him in the dark. Inside the cabin, the fire took hold quickly under Samuel's practiced hands. He laid Daniel near the hearth and went to work. Wet jacket off, dry blankets wrapped tight, more wood fed into the fire until the small room blazed with orange heat. He warmed milk on the iron stove and knelt beside the young ranger and waited. It was 20 minutes before Daniel's fingers moved, another 10 before his eyes came open, unfocused first, moving across the log ceiling of the cabin as if trying to understand what he was looking at.
"Easy," Samuel said from the chair beside him. "Don't rush yourself." Daniel turned his head. He looked at the old man for a long moment, his mind slowly assembling what had happened. "I crashed," he said. His voice was barely a sound. "You did," Samuel said simply. "I don't remember." He stopped, swallowed. "How did you find me?" Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he lifted his chin toward the window. Daniel turned his head slowly toward the frosted glass. Outside, in the falling snow, the wild horse stood at the edge of the tree line, still, enormous, watching the cabin with those calm, dark eyes. Snow gathered along his back and across his mane, and he did not move, not to shake it off, not to seek shelter. He simply stood there, as patient and steady as the mountains behind him. Daniel stared for a long time without speaking. "He came to your door," he finally said. It was not quite a question. "Came to my door," Samuel confirmed quietly, "and led me straight to you." The fire crackled between them. The storm pressed softly at the walls. Neither man spoke for a while, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have just been reminded that there are things in this world that cannot be fully understood, only accepted with gratitude. By morning, the storm was gone. The forest stood clean and white and perfectly still in the pale winter light, as if the night before had been a dream. The rescue team arrived before 8, lights moving through the trees, the crunch of boots in fresh snow, voices calling Daniel's name across the silence. They found him, standing on Samuel's porch, alive. The paramedics were thorough and careful. Mild hypothermia, a cut along his left temple that would need stitches, bruised ribs that would ache for weeks, serious but survivable. Survivable because of what had found him in the dark and refused to leave him there. As they walked him toward the ambulance, Daniel stopped. He turned back toward the tree line. The horse was still there. Daniel walked toward him slowly through the bright morning snow, and the horse watched him come without moving, ears forward, body still, those dark eyes holding steady. Daniel stopped close. He reached out slowly and placed his open hand against the animal's neck. He felt the warmth there, the deep, steady pulse, the rise and fall of that great chest, breathing calmly in the cold morning air. He stood there without speaking for a long moment, his hand resting against the horse's neck, his eyes closed. When he finally stepped back, the horse held his gaze for one long breath. Then it turned, walked slowly back to the tree line, and disappeared between the frozen pines, quietly, without ceremony, the way it had come. Samuel watched from the porch. "Will you be all right?" Daniel called back to him. The old man almost smiled. "Been all right 31 years out here," he said. "Don't plan on stopping now." Daniel nodded once. He looked one last time at the empty tree line. Then he walked to the ambulance, and the road curved away through the white trees, and the wilderness closed quietly behind him. Some deaths cannot be repaid. They can only be carried, gently, carefully, like something precious, for the rest of your life. Daniel Brooks never forgot what happened in that storm. He went back to that road every winter after, not always looking for the horse, but always leaving with the feeling that something out there in the frozen pines was still watching over him. And somewhere in the Alaskan wilderness, a wild horse still walks through the snow, silent, uncelebrated, exactly as it should be.
This video is for educational purposes. This story is a fictional narrative created for educational and storytelling purposes by Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. extreme winter survival. In Alaska, temperatures can drop to -45 degrees Celsius. At this level, hypothermia becomes life-threatening within minutes without shelter or warmth. Daniel's survival was measured not in hours, but in moments. Wild horse instincts. Horses possess extraordinary sensory awareness and have historically shown deep empathy, approaching injured or distressed humans even in dangerous conditions. Isolated communities. Thousands of elderly individuals like Samuel live alone in remote wilderness areas. Their quiet courage often becomes the difference between life and death. Respect for wildlife. The natural world operates with its own wisdom. It deserves our respect, protection, and humility. Always carry emergency equipment and never underestimate the power of nature.